When the Mafia boss saw the bruises his quiet maid kept hiding under her sleeve, he assumed the worst. But the truth behind those marks was something no one in the city saw coming. What started as one woman's secret would soon bring the most respected man in Chicago to his knees. By the time it was over, the entire city would never look at either of them the same way again. Grant Calloway noticed 3 things the moment Avery Bennett walked into his study that morning. Her hands were shaking, her eyes were red from crying or from not sleeping, and there was a long bruise running down her forearm that she kept trying to cover with her sleeve. He said nothing. Grant had learned a long time ago that the fastest way to make someone lie was to ask them a direct question too soon. "Good morning, Mr. Calloway," Avery said, setting a tray of coffee on the corner of his desk. She always called him that, even though she had worked in his lakeside mansion for almost a year now. "I'll just dust the shelves and stay out of your way." "Take your time," Grant said. He pretended to read the documents in front of him, but his eyes followed her around the room. She was a careful worker, quiet and thorough, the kind of person who fixed crooked picture frames without being asked. But today she moved like every step hurt. When she reached up to wipe the top shelf, her sleeve slid down. Grant saw it clearly then. Not one bruise, but several, in different stages of healing. Some were fresh and purple. Others were faded yellow-green, days old. They circled her arm like she had been gripping something heavy over and over again. Avery caught him looking. She yanked the sleeve back down so fast that the duster fell from her hand. "It's nothing," she said quickly. Too quickly. "I was helping move some boxes at a storage place. I'm clumsy. I bumped into a stack of them." Grant set down his pen. "Storage boxes did all that? You know me, sir. I trip over my own feet." She forced a small laugh, picked up the duster, and turned away from him. "I'll get back to work." He let it go, for now. But Grant Calloway did not get to where he was in this city by ignoring the things that didn't add up. People feared his name across Chicago. They whispered it in back rooms and crossed the street when his car drove by. He had built an empire out of reading people, out of knowing when a story was true and when it was carefully stitched together to hide something. And Avery's story had loose threads everywhere. A storage place, boxes, bruises in different stages, which meant whatever she was doing, she had been doing it for weeks. He watched her finish the shelves, her jaw tight, blinking back something she didn't want him to see. An hour later, Grant walked down the long hallway toward the kitchen to refill his own coffee, a habit his staff found strange for a man with so many people willing to do it for him. He liked moving through his own house quietly. It was how he kept track of things. That was when he heard her voice. Avery was standing in the small service corridor near the back door, her phone pressed hard against her ear, her free hand covering her mouth like she was trying to keep her voice down. Grant stopped just before the corner. He didn't mean to listen, then he heard the word that made him stay. "Gone," she was saying. "Logan, it's all gone, every dollar. I checked the account 3 times this morning, there's nothing left." A pause. "No, I'm not blaming you. I'm not." Her voice cracked. "But that was Mom's money too. That was everything we saved. We did everything they told us to do. We signed the papers. We waited like they said, and now the office is closed and nobody answers the phone." Another pause. Grant could hear her breathing shake. "I'll fix it," she whispered. "I don't know how yet, but I'll find out where it went. People don't just take your whole life and disappear. Somebody knows something." She ended the call and pressed her forehead against the wall for a long moment. Then she straightened up, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and walked back toward the dining room as if nothing had happened. Grant stayed where he was, the empty coffee cup still in his hand. Missing money, a closed office, papers they signed, and bruises she got carrying boxes from a storage place late into the evening for weeks. Suddenly, the pieces lined up in a way that made his chest go cold and quiet. She wasn't being hurt by a person. She was breaking her own body, trying to save her family from drowning. And somebody had taken everything they had. Grant set the cup down on a side table and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a number he only used when something needed to be handled without noise, without questions, without anyone ever knowing he had been involved. Ethan Pierce answered on the first ring. "Mr. Calloway, I need you to look into something," Grant said, keeping his voice low. "Quietly, there's a young woman who works for me, Avery Bennett. She and her brother lost money to some kind of investment, an office that's gone dark. I want to know what company, who ran it, and where that money went. How deep do you want me to dig?" Grant looked down the hall, toward the room where Avery was already humming softly as she worked, pretending the world wasn't falling apart underneath her. "All the way to the bottom," he said. "And Ethan, she can't know. Whatever this is, she's been carrying it alone. I want to know what we're dealing with before she gets hurt worse than she already is." He hung up. Outside the tall windows, the lake was flat and gray under a low Chicago sky. Grant had no idea yet that the small thread he had just pulled was tied to something that would shake the entire city to the ground. Ethan Pierce started before sunrise. He parked his car half a block from the small apartment building where Avery lived, sipped cold coffee, and waited. At 6 in the morning, she came out wearing her work clothes, a worn canvas bag over her shoulder. She walked to the bus stop, head down against the wind off the lake, and rode across the city to Grant's mansion like she did every day. That part Ethan already knew. It was what happened after work that interested him. When Avery's shift ended in the late afternoon, she didn't take the bus home. She got off 2 stops early, near a row of brick storefronts on the west side, and walked into a neighborhood credit union. Ethan followed her in a few minutes later, pretending to fill out a deposit slip at the counter. Avery was at a desk in the corner, talking to a loan officer. Ethan couldn't hear all of it, but he caught enough. She slid a thick folder across the desk. The officer flipped through it, shook his head slowly, and said something that made Avery's shoulders drop. She nodded, gathered her papers, and left. Ethan gave her a head start, then followed. Her next stop was a legal aid office wedged between a laundromat and a closed shoe store. The sign in the window said, "Free consultations on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Avery sat in the waiting room for nearly an hour. When she finally came out, a tired-looking woman in a cardigan walked her to the door and handed her a stack of forms. Avery thanked her over and over, the way people do when they're grateful and also afraid it won't be enough. Ethan wrote down the name of the legal aid office and kept watching. The third stop surprised him. Avery walked 6 blocks south to a community center, an old building with a basketball hoop out front and a hand-painted banner over the door. She didn't go in like a visitor. She went in like she belonged there. Through the front window, Ethan watched her set her bag down, pull out the same thick folder, and join 3 other people at a long table covered in paperwork. They greeted her by name. Someone brought her a cup of tea. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work, sorting documents into neat piles. And there, under the fluorescent lights, Ethan saw her arms clearly for the first time. The bruises ran along her forearms and wrists. He had seen marks like that before, on dock workers and movers. They came from lifting heavy things again and again, gripping box edges, hauling crates that were too big for one person. He sat in his car and called Grant. "She's not in trouble with anyone," Ethan said. "Not the way you might be thinking. She lost money to some kind of investment, like you said. But she didn't just lose it and give up. She's spending every evening trying to get it back. Credit union, legal aid, and now some community center where she's helping other people sort through paperwork." "What investment?" Grant asked. "I'm still pulling the name." From what I can see, she and her brother put their savings into a company that promised steady returns, something about safe long-term growth for working families. They signed everything, waited the way they were told to, and then the office shut down and the phones went dead. No refunds, no explanation. Grant was quiet on the other end. "And the bruises? That's the part that got to me," Ethan said. "There's a storage warehouse she's been going to after the community center some nights. She's hauling boxes of old records out of there by herself. Files from people who put money into the same company. She's been moving them for weeks, carrying them across the city so she can go through them. The marks on her arms are from the boxes. She's been breaking her back trying to build a case nobody asked her to build." He heard Grant let out a slow breath. "So she told the truth," Grant said, "about the boxes. She just left out why. She left out everything that matters. Ethan kept digging that night. He found the brother first." Logan Bennett, 2 years younger than Avery, worked at a hardware store and lived in the same building. From a few quiet conversations with neighbors, Ethan pieced together the rest. After their mother passed, the two of them had pooled what she left behind with everything they'd saved on their own. A man at the company had been kind to them, patient, full of charts and promises. He told them this was how regular people built something lasting. They believed him because they wanted to, and because he made it so easy to believe. Then one Monday the office was empty. No furniture, no staff, no forwarding number. Just a locked door and a name on a lease that led nowhere. Logan blamed himself. He had been the one who found the company, the one who talked his sister into trusting it. Avery, from what Ethan could tell, had never once said it was his fault. She just put her head down and went looking for the money herself. The next morning, Ethan drove out to the mansion to report in person. He found Grant standing at the tall windows in his study, watching the gray water. "There's something else," Ethan said. "The other families at that community center. There are a lot of them. Dozens at least. And that's just the ones in her neighborhood. This wasn't one bad deal. Whatever this company was, it took money from a whole lot of people who couldn't afford to lose it." Grant turned from the window, find out who was really running it, not the man behind the desk. The name on top of everything. "You think someone's hiding?" "I think a man who can empty an office overnight and vanish without a trace has done this before," Grant said. "And he'll do it again unless someone stops him." Grant Calloway did not blend into ordinary places. He knew that. A man in a tailored coat stepping out of a black car drew eyes everywhere he went, and the South Side Community Center was no different. So he came with a reason that no one could argue with. He came to give money. The director was a broad-shouldered man named Marcus, who had run the center for 20 years. When Grant introduced himself as a private donor interested in supporting local programs, Marcus shook his hand warmly and gave him a tour without a hint of suspicion. The gym, the after-school room, the small kitchen where volunteers packed meals. Grant nodded at all of it, asked the right questions, and waited. At the end of the hall was a meeting room with the door propped open. Inside, a dozen people sat around, folding tables stacked high with binders and loose papers, and at the head of one table, sleeves pushed up, hair tied back, was Avery. Grant slowed his step. She didn't see him. She was bent over a spreadsheet, explaining something to an older couple sitting across from her. The man held a crumpled envelope in both hands, like it might fall apart. Avery spoke softly, pointing at numbers on the page, and the woman nodded along with tears sliding down her face. "What's this room?" Grant asked the director, keeping his voice even. Marcus's smile faded a little. "That's a hard one, Mr. Calloway. Those are folks who lost their savings to an investment company. Came through here about a year ago, looked respectable, had the suits and the paperwork. A lot of families in this neighborhood trusted it. Then it closed up overnight and took everything with it. Grant kept his eyes on Avery. How many families? More than I can count anymore. It started with a handful coming in for help. Now we've got people driving in from other neighborhoods. Word spread that we were keeping records, trying to figure out where the money went. Marcus nodded toward the tables. That young woman there started it, Avery. She doesn't work here. She comes in after her own job and stays till we lock up. She organized the whole thing, taught the others how to file claims, how to keep copies of everything. She did all this herself. Nobody asked her to. One day she just showed up with a box of papers and a list of questions, and she never stopped coming. Marcus lowered his voice. Between you and me, I worry about her. She gives everything she's got to these people, and I don't think she's got much left for herself. Grant moved closer to the doorway, careful to stay out of Avery's line of sight. He listened. A man at the far table was describing how he'd put his retirement money into the company because a friend from church had recommended it. A young mother said she'd invested the small settlement she got after a workplace injury. Money meant to carry her family through hard times. One after another, the stories circled the same shape, a friendly representative, a promise of safe, steady growth for people who didn't have much to begin with, signed papers, a waiting period, then silence and a locked door. These weren't reckless people gambling on get-rich schemes. They were nurses, mechanics, retired teachers, parents working double shifts. They had been careful with their money their whole lives. That care was exactly what someone had used against them. Grant felt something harden in his chest. He had spent years in a world where people lied and cheated for power. He understood greed. But there was a particular kind of cruelty in this, in choosing victims precisely because they had so little to lose and trusted so easily. Avery's voice rose just enough for him to catch it. "We don't give up," she was telling the room. "I know it feels like nobody cares, but every paper we save, every name we write down, that's one more piece of proof. They wanted us scattered and quiet. We're not going to be either of those things." The people around the tables nodded. A few wiped their eyes. The room felt less like a place of loss and more like a place where something was being slowly built. Grant stepped back into the hall before she could notice him. He turned to Marcus. "I'd like to make a donation today," he said. "A real one. For the building, the programs, whatever you need most." He paused. "And I'd like it kept anonymous. No plaque, no announcement. Can you do that?" Marcus blinked, surprised. "That's generous, Mr. Calloway. Most people who give this kind of money want their name on the wall. I'm not most people." Grant took out a card and wrote a number on the back, then handed it over. "One more thing. The records that young woman has been keeping. The claims, the names of the families. How safe are they?" "Safe enough, I suppose. We keep them locked in the office." "Make copies," Grant said. "More than one set. Keep them somewhere else." When Marcus frowned, Grant added, "A company that can disappear overnight can do other things too. If those records ever go missing, every one of these families loses their only proof. Protect them." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll see to it tonight." Grant left through the front door without looking back into the meeting room. He sat in his car for a while, watching the lights glow in the center's windows as the evening came down. He had expected to find a frightened young woman buried under a problem too big for her. Instead, he had found someone fighting a battle most people would have walked away from, dragging dozens of strangers toward hope with nothing but stubbornness and a box of papers. This was no small dispute over a bad deal. This was something with deep roots, hidden behind a respectable face, and Grant was beginning to think he knew the kind of man he would find at the end of it. He picked up his phone and called Ethan. Whatever you've found so far, Grant said, it's bigger than that. Go deeper. The warehouse sat near the Chicago River, a long brick building with rusted loading doors and windows clouded by years of grime. Ethan had followed Avery there 3 nights in a row before he decided to go in himself. He waited until she left, watching her load 2 heavy boxes into the trunk of a borrowed car, her arms straining under the weight. When her taillights disappeared down the road, Ethan slipped inside through a side door that didn't latch properly. The place was mostly empty. A few stacks of old furniture, some broken shelving, and in the back corner, a section that someone had clearly been using. Rows of cardboard boxes sat on wooden pallets, each one labeled in neat handwriting, Avery's handwriting. Ethan recognized it from the forms he'd seen at the community center. He opened the nearest box. Inside were financial documents, contracts, account statements, all belonging to people he didn't know, former investors. He flipped through one folder and found a name printed across the top of every page, Meridian Trust Holdings. Ethan photographed the documents and kept moving. Box after box told the same story. People had signed agreements with Meridian Trust, handed over their savings, and received glossy quarterly statements showing their money growing nicely. The statements looked official, full of charts and percentages, but the deeper Ethan dug, the stranger they became. The growth was always smooth, always steady, never a bad month. Real investments didn't behave that way. Real money went up and down. This money only ever went up, right until the day it vanished. He took the photos back to the mansion and laid out what he'd found on Grant's desk. Meridian Trust Holdings, Grant read aloud, turning the pages. Who's behind it? That's the wall I keep hitting, Ethan said. On paper, the company was run by a handful of people who all turn out to be dead ends. Fake addresses, names that lead nowhere. Whoever set this up knew how to stay invisible. He pulled out another sheet. But Avery found something I didn't expect. She's smarter than the people who built this thing gave her credit for. The next evening, Ethan went back to the warehouse. This time, Avery was there, sorting through a box that looked older than the rest, the cardboard soft and water-stained at the corners. He watched her freeze, pull out a single document, and read it twice. Her hand went to her mouth. Ethan stepped out of the shadows. He had decided, against his usual instincts, that she was someone he could trust with the truth. "Don't be afraid," he said quietly, raising his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Ethan. I work for someone who's been worried about you." Avery backed against the pallet, clutching the paper. "Who?" "You won't believe me if I tell you," Ethan said. "But I think we want the same thing. I think we're both trying to find out where your money went." It took a while to calm her down. But Avery was exhausted and frightened, and carrying too much alone, and something in Ethan's steady voice made her listen. Slowly, she showed him what she'd found. The document was an old internal memo, the kind that should never have ended up in an investor's file. It had been misfiled, slipped into a folder by mistake years ago. It listed the names of several small businesses that Meridian Trust used to move money between accounts, and at the bottom, almost as an afterthought, a single line referenced the man who had signed off on the arrangement. W. Mercer. "Wyatt Mercer," Avery whispered. "I've seen that name, everyone has. He's on the news at every charity event in the city. He gives speeches about helping working families." She looked up at Ethan, her eyes wide. "He's supposed to be one of the good ones." Ethan took the memo and studied it. Men like Mercer are good at looking good. It's the whole game. You build a clean face the public loves, and then nobody believes you could be capable of anything ugly. The cleaner the face, the bigger the lie behind it. Avery sank onto a wooden crate. "But this is just one piece of paper, one name on one old memo. Nobody's going to take down a man like that with this." "No," Ethan agreed, "but it's a thread." And once you've got a thread, you pull. He looked at her steadily. You've already done more than most people ever would. You found this. Now let us help you carry it. She studied him for a long moment, weighing the strange offer, the stranger in the warehouse, the impossible idea that someone with real power might be on her side. This person you work for, she said. Why does he care? Ethan thought about how to answer that. The truth that Grant Calloway had noticed the bruises on her arm and refused to look away felt too tangled to explain. Because he saw someone being crushed by something that wasn't her fault, Ethan said. And he's not the kind of man who can ignore that, even when it would be easier. Avery wiped her face and stood up. She handed Ethan the memo, then gathered the rest of the box into her aching arms. Then tell him I said thank you, she said. But also tell him I'm not stopping, not for anything. These people trusted Meridian, trust the way they'd trust a neighbor. Mercer took that and walked away clean. I want everyone in this city to know exactly what he is. Ethan helped her load the box into the car. As her taillights pulled away again, he stood in the dark warehouse and called Grant. It's Wyatt Mercer, Ethan said. She found a memo with his name on it. He's been hiding behind every photo op and charity dinner in Chicago, and the whole time he's been moving people's savings through businesses he controls. Grant was silent for a moment. Then we don't fight him in the dark, he finally said. We follow the money until there's nowhere left for him to hide. Where does the next thread lead? Ethan looked down at the photographs on his phone, at a list of shell businesses that stretched beyond Illinois. North, he said. Milwaukee. They drove up to Milwaukee on a cold, bright morning, the three of them in one car. Avery sat in the back with her folder of documents on her lap, refusing to let it out of her sight. Ethan drove, and Grant, who could have sent anyone, came along himself. That surprised Avery most of all. She had met him properly for the first time 2 days earlier. When Ethan brought her to the mansion and she realized the man who had been quietly protecting her was the same Grant Calloway, whose floors she scrubbed every morning. She'd been too stunned to speak. He had simply told her the truth, that he'd noticed the bruises, overheard the phone call, and couldn't look away. Then he'd asked her what she needed, as if she were the one in charge. Now he sat in the front seat, watching the highway unfold, saying little. Why are you really doing this? Avery finally asked. You don't know these families. You don't owe them anything. Grant was quiet for a moment. When I was younger, before all this, my mother put everything she had into a man who promised to take care of us, he said. He took it and disappeared. She worked herself sick trying to make up the difference. I watched what it did to her. He looked out the window. I told myself if I ever had the power to stop someone like that, I would. Turns out the chance found me in my own study. Avery didn't say anything, but something in her chest loosened a little. The first former employee they met was a woman named Diane, who had worked in Meridian Trust's Milwaukee office before it closed. She agreed to talk only because Avery came in person, sat across from her at a kitchen table, and showed her the faces of the families on her phone. Diane looked at the photos for a long time. I didn't know, Diane said quietly. Not at first. I thought it was a real company. We had clients, statements, an office. My job was to process transfers. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. But after a while I started to notice things. Money would come in from clients, and within a week it would go out to other businesses. Companies I'd never heard of. Consulting firms, real estate groups, import companies, none of them had any employees I could find. The money just kept moving. Shell companies, Ethan said. Diane nodded. I asked my manager about it once. He told me not to worry, that it was all part of a complex investment strategy. He said the smartest minds in finance did things ordinary people couldn't understand. I wanted to believe him because I needed the job. Her voice dropped. Then one Friday they told us the office was closing for restructuring. Said we'd hear about new positions soon. We never did, and every client who called after that got a deadline. Avery leaned forward. Did you ever see Wyatt Mercer? Diane shook her head slowly. Never in person. But his name was on documents that came from the top. The really important transfers, the big ones, they always needed a signature from above. We just called it corporate. Now and then a paper would slip through with his name on it before someone caught the mistake. She paused. He was careful. Most of the time you'd never know he existed. But he was always there, somewhere above all of us, pulling money up through the company like water through a straw. Over the next 2 days, they found 3 more former employees. Their stories fit together like pieces of the same broken machine. Client money flowed into Meridian Trust, then out through a web of businesses that existed only on paper, scattered across several states. Each company passed the money to the next, until the trail became so tangled that no ordinary person could follow it. By the time the money reached the top, it looked clean, like it had come from honest profits instead of the savings of nurses and retirees. Avery spread the documents across a motel bed that night, connecting names with a pen and a length of string she'd bought at a hardware store. Lines crossed lines. Illinois to Wisconsin. Wisconsin to companies registered far beyond. Hundreds of families, maybe more, in cities she'd never visited, all funneled into the same dark center. It's not just Chicago, she said, sitting back on her heels. He's been doing this everywhere, for years. Different company names, same trick. He moves into a city, finds the people with the least to spare, takes everything, and vanishes before anyone connects it to him. Grant stood in the doorway, arms crossed, studying the web of string. How many cities? I've counted 5 so far, Avery said. But this is only what's in these boxes. There could be more. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The weight of it filled the small room. This wasn't one closed office and a few dozen ruined families. This was a pattern stretched across the country, kept alive by a man whose face smiled out from charity posters and newspaper photos. Avery expected to feel crushed by the size of it. Instead, something stronger settled over her. Fear had carried her this far, fear and stubbornness and love for her brother. But standing in that motel room, looking at every line she'd drawn, she felt the fear turn into something with a spine. He thinks people like us are too small to fight back, she said. That's the whole plan. Take a little from a lot of people, so no single person has enough to chase him. She looked up at Grant and Ethan. But there are more of us than there are of him. If we can put all of it in one place, all these families, all these papers, all these cities, then he can't make it disappear. It's too big to hide. Grant almost smiled. Now you sound like someone who's going to win. I'm going to need help, Avery admitted. Somebody who can get this in front of the whole city. Somebody people will listen to. Ethan and Grant exchanged a glance. I might know someone, Grant said. Marlene Brooks had spent 20 years chasing stories that powerful people wanted buried. She had a corner desk in a newsroom that grew quieter every year, a reputation for being impossible to scare off, and a deep distrust of anyone who arrived with a tidy story and a generous smile. So when Grant Calloway's name came up as the person who wanted to meet her, she almost said no. I know what you are, she told him bluntly, sitting across from him and Avery in a back booth of a diner she'd chosen herself. Half the rumors in this city have your name attached to them. Why would I trust anything that comes from you? You shouldn't trust me, Grant said. Trust her. He nodded toward Avery. And trust the papers. I'm only the one who opened the door. The rest is hers. Marlene turned to Avery, her sharp eyes softening just slightly. All right, show me what you've got. Avery laid it out on the table, the investor files, the internal memo with Mercer's name, the list of shell companies, the string and pen map she'd built across 5 cities. She talked for nearly an hour, and Marlene listened without interrupting, scribbling notes in a battered pad, occasionally stopping her to ask a hard question. "This statement here," Marlene said, tapping a quarterly report. "The returns never dip, not once in 3 years." "I know," Avery said. "That's what made me sure something was wrong. My brother kept saying we were just lucky. But money doesn't work like that. Real investments breathe. These never did." Marlene sat back. For the first time, the skepticism left her face. "You're right. This is the oldest trick there is, dressed up in modern clothes. They take money from new investors and use it to pay the old ones, just enough to keep everyone happy and quiet. As long as more people keep joining, it looks like it's working. The day people stop joining, the whole thing collapses, and whoever's at the top is already gone with the real money." "Can you prove it's Mercer?" Grant asked. "Not yet. One memo isn't enough. A man like that has lawyers who eat memos for breakfast." Marlene flipped through her notes. "But patterns are different. If I can show this same scheme happening in 5 cities under different company names, all tracing back to him, that's not a misunderstanding. That's a design. And designs have a fingerprint." She agreed to take the story. For the next 2 weeks, Marlene worked harder than she had in years. She drove to the other cities Avery had marked, knocking on doors, sitting at more kitchen tables, gathering the same broken story from strangers who had never met each other, but had all lost everything the same way. She found old business filings, traced the shell companies through public records, and slowly assembled a chain that linked them, one by one, back toward the same hidden hand. The more she dug, the more victims came forward. Word spread through the community center and beyond. People who had stayed silent out of shame, certain they had been foolish, began to realize they were part of something far larger than their own bad luck. The pile of evidence grew. So did the number of names willing to go on record. Then Wyatt Mercer made his first move. It started small. A glowing profile of him appeared in a business magazine, praising his charity work and his commitment to ordinary families. A week later, he gave a televised interview where he spoke unprompted about how the financial world was full of misunderstandings and how good men were too often blamed for things beyond their control. He never mentioned Meridian Trust by name. He didn't have to. "He knows," Marlene said grimly, watching the interview on her phone. "Somebody tipped him off that questions are being asked, so he's getting ahead of it, building a story where he's the victim of confusion and jealousy. By the time the truth comes out, he wants the public already on his side." Avery felt her stomach sink. "He's so good at it. He looks so calm, so reasonable." She set down her cup. "What if it works? What if people believe him instead of us? He's got money, lawyers, the news. We've got a box of papers and a string map. That's exactly what he's counting on you to feel," Marlene said. "He wants you to look at the size of him and decide you're too small to win. It's the same thing he did to all those families. Make them feel alone. Make them feel foolish. Make them give up before they ever start." "But what if he's right about us?" Avery's voice was quiet. "What if we're not enough?" Grant, who had been silent, finally spoke. "When I was young, I learned that the men who look the most untouchable are usually the ones with the most to lose," he said. "A poor man fears nothing because he has nothing to take." Mercer built himself a beautiful glass house and filled it with everything he stole. That's not strength, that's a target. He looked at Avery. He's not running a PR campaign because he's confident. He's running it because he's afraid. The moment you scared him, you stopped being too small to win. Avery let that settle. She thought about the older couple at the community center, clutching their crumpled envelope, the young mother with the injury settlement, Her own brother lying awake at night, blaming himself. None of them had asked for any of this. All of them deserved to be believed. Then we don't let him write the ending first, she said. We bring it all out into the open, where he can't twist it in the dark. Marlene smiled, the tired, fierce smile of someone who had waited a long time for a story worth telling. As it happens, she said, I know just the place to do it. Mercer's hosting a charity gala downtown next week. Every important person in the city will be there, and so will every camera. She tapped her pad. He wants to use that night to look like a hero. I say we let him stand on his own stage. Grant's eyes glinted. And then we hand the microphone to the truth. The ballroom of the Lakeshore Grand glittered like something out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers hung from a high ceiling. Waiters moved between tables with silver trays. The wealthiest and most important people in Chicago filled the room in their finest clothes. And at the center of it all stood Wyatt Mercer, shaking hands, laughing easily, perfectly at home. Grant arrived with Avery on his arm. She wore a borrowed evening gown that Grant had insisted on, and she felt like a fraud in it. Certain everyone could see she didn't belong, but Grant walked beside her with the calm of a man who belonged everywhere, and slowly she found she could breathe. Remember, he murmured, tonight he thinks he's winning. Let him keep thinking it as long as possible. Marlene was already inside, moving through the crowd with her press credentials, a small bag at her side. Marcus from the community center had come too, along with 3 of the families, dressed in their best, standing nervously near the back. Mercer had no idea who any of them were. The program began. A local performer sang. A short film played, showing Mercer visiting schools and shelters, his face warm with practiced kindness. The crowd applauded. Then Mercer himself took the stage, microphone in hand, and the room went quiet. Friends, he said, we live in a time when good intentions are too often misunderstood. When honest men are dragged through the mud by people looking for someone to blame. A few heads nodded. Tonight is about something better. It's about lifting up the families who need us most. Avery's hands curled into fists. She thought of the older couple, the young mother, her brother. This man spoke of lifting families while standing on the savings he had taken from, hundreds of them. Mercer finished to warm applause and stepped down, basking in it. That was when Marlene walked to the front of the room. She didn't ask permission. She simply stepped up beside the small podium where the evening's announcements were made, took the microphone, and said in a clear, steady voice, Before we continue, there's something this room deserves to see. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mercer's smile flickered. Behind Marlene, a large screen meant for sponsor logos lit up. The first image was a quarterly statement from Meridian Trust Holdings. The numbers clean and perfect. This is what hundreds of families across 5 cities were shown, Marlene said. Steady growth, month after month, year after year. It looked like safety. It looked like a future. She advanced to the next slide. It was a lie. The room stilled. Slide by slide, Marlene laid it out. The money flowing in from ordinary people. The transfers out to businesses with no employees, no offices, no purpose except to move money and hide it. The trail crossing state lines, looping through shell after shell, until it disappeared into accounts no one could trace. She named the cities. She showed the faces of the families. Real people with real losses, projected 10 feet tall above a ballroom full of the city's elite. A retired teacher, Marlene said. A mother who lost the settlement meant to feed her children. A couple who handed over everything they'd saved in 40 years of work. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried to every corner of the room. They were chosen because they had little and trusted easily and would be too ashamed to speak. The man who designed this counted on their silence. She turned, and so did every face in the room, toward Wyatt Mercer. "This is his fingerprint," Marlene said, and the final slide appeared. The internal memo Avery had found, water-stained and creased, with a single name signed at the bottom, W. Mercer. Beside it, Marlene placed the business filings she had traced, each one circling back to the same hand. For a moment, no one moved. Mercer recovered fast. He laughed, a warm, dismissive laugh, and stepped forward with his palms raised. "This is exactly what I was talking about," he said smoothly. "A misunderstanding dressed up as a scandal. One old memo, a few documents taken out of context. I've devoted my life to helping people. Are we really going to believe a reporter over everything I've built?" A few guests shifted, uncertain. The room teetered. Then a voice spoke from the back. "I worked for you." Diane, the former employee from Milwaukee, stepped forward. Avery had not known she was coming. Diane's hands shook, but her voice held. "I processed the transfers. I watched the money leave the moment it came in. I asked questions and was told to stop. I'm done staying quiet." She looked around the room. "Everything she showed you is true. I saw it with my own eyes." One by one, the families near the back stepped forward too. The older couple, the young mother. Their faces matched the ones on the screen. They didn't shout or accuse. They simply stood, present and real, while the city's elite looked at them and understood that these were not abstractions or political talking points. They were neighbors. The mood in the room turned like a tide. The uncertainty in the guests' faces hardened into something colder, directed now at the man on the stage. Whispers spread. A few people set down their glasses and quietly moved away from Mercer, as if his ruin might be catching. Mercer's smile finally broke. For just a second, the warmth dropped away, and something hard and frightened showed underneath. He scanned the room for an ally and found none. Avery stepped out of the crowd. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just looked at him, this man who had taken her mother's money and her brother's peace and the savings of so many people she'd come to know. "You thought we were too small to find you," she said quietly. "We weren't." Mercer opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing he could say that the entire room hadn't just watched fall apart. He turned and walked quickly toward a side door, his perfect evening collapsing behind him. The cameras followed him out. Grant found Avery's side and rested a steadying hand on her shoulder. "It's begun," he said softly. "By morning the whole city will know his name, and not the way he wanted them to." By sunrise, Wyatt Mercer's name was everywhere. Marlene's story ran first, a long, careful piece built on months of evidence, every claim backed by a document. Then the rest of the city's reporters, who had ignored the rumors for years, scrambled to catch up. The footage from the gala played over and over. Mercer walking quickly toward the side door. The families standing in their best clothes. Diane's shaking voice cutting through the ballroom. The story didn't fade the way Mercer had always counted on. It grew. Financial investigators who had brushed off scattered complaints now had something they couldn't ignore. Hundreds of victims, organized records, a trail mapped across 5 cities, and a former employee willing to talk on the record. Within days, the shell companies Avery had charted on her motel bed were being torn open one by one. What had taken her months of hauling boxes and drawing string lines, the investigators now followed in hours, because she had already done the hardest part. She had shown them where to look. Mercer's empire began to come apart from every direction at once. Business partners who had smiled beside him at 100 events suddenly couldn't remember him. The charities that had displayed his name on their walls quietly took it down. Banks that had handled his accounts froze them pending review. His lawyers, the ones who ate memos for breakfast, found that a single memo had become a flood of memos, statements, filings, and witnesses, and there was no appetite left to be eaten through. Then the lawsuits started. The families filed together, all of them at once, exactly the way Avery had imagined in that small motel room. Not scattered, not silent, but joined into one voice too large to wave away. More victims came forward every day. As the news spread to the other cities, people who had spent years believing they alone had been foolish, now realizing they were part of something enormous, and that they were finally being heard. Through all of it, Avery kept working. She spent her days at the community center, helping the new families file their claims, teaching them to keep copies of everything, just as she always had. The difference now was that lawyers and investigators came to her, asking for the records she'd built, treating her not as a maid with a box of papers, but as the person who had cracked the whole thing open. One afternoon, an investigator sat across from her with a thick file and a quiet, almost embarrassed look. "We traced your family's money," he said. "It moved through 4 companies and ended up in an account we've now frozen along with the rest. It'll take time, and you won't get all of it back, the way these things go. But you'll get a real share, so will the others." Avery stared at the paper. For months the money had been an abstract loss, a number that vanished, a hole in her family's life. Now there was a line on a page that said it had been found. She pressed her hand over her mouth and let herself cry, for the first time in a long time, not out of fear, but out of relief. That evening she went to see Logan. Her brother had grown thin and quiet over the months, eaten alive by guilt. He had been the one who found Meridian Trust, the one who showed Avery the charts, who said this was how regular people built something lasting. When it collapsed, he had carried the blame like a stone in his chest, certain he had ruined them both. She found him at his kitchen table, the way she always did, staring at nothing. "They found it, Logan," she said, sitting across from him. "The money. It moved through their companies just like everyone else's. It's frozen now. We'll get a share back." He didn't look up right away. "I still don't understand how I didn't see it," he said. "I'm the one who trusted them. I'm the one who—" "Stop!" Avery reached across the table and took his hands. "You didn't see it because you weren't supposed to see it. None of us were. That was the whole point. They built it to fool careful people, smart people, honest people." She squeezed his hands. A retired teacher fell for it. A man who'd saved for 40 years fell for it. Diane worked inside it, and it took her months to understand. "You didn't fail us, Logan. A man designed a trap to catch good people, and you walked into it the same as hundreds of others." Logan finally looked at her, his eyes wet. "You never blamed me, not once, even at the worst of it, because it was never yours to carry," Avery said. "It was his. And now the whole city knows it." Something in her brother's face broke open and then, slowly, eased. The weight he'd carried for so long didn't vanish all at once, but for the first time she could see him set it down. He pulled her into a hug across the table, and the two of them held on, the last knot of a long year finally coming loose. In the weeks that followed, the collapse became complete. Mercer's companies dissolved. His remaining assets were seized to begin repaying the people he'd robbed. The man who had spent years building a flawless public face watched it crumble in full view of the city that had once admired him. And there was no charity gala, no glossy magazine profile, no smooth interview that could put it back together. The face had been the lie. Underneath it, there had only ever been the theft. Savory sat with Grant in his study one evening as the lake turned silver in the last light. "You did this," Grant said. "We did this," she answered. "I never could have reached that room without you. They'd have buried me." She looked down at her hands, at the faint marks on her arms that had finally begun to fade for good. "But it's not enough to just stop him. There are other men like him out there. There'll be other companies, other promises, other families who don't know what to look for." Grant studied her. "What are you thinking?" Avery lifted her eyes, and there was something steady in them now. something that had grown out of everything she'd survived. I'm thinking we make sure the next family sees it coming. The building near the lakefront had stood empty for years. It had once been a bank of all things, a heavy stone structure with tall windows and a grand front door. When Avery first walked through it, the floors were thick with dust, and pigeons had gotten in through a broken pane upstairs. But she stood in the middle of the wide main hall, looked up at the high ceiling and saw exactly what it could become. A bank that stole nothing, she said, almost laughing. A place that gives people knowledge instead of taking their money. Grant had bought the building quietly, through one of his own companies, and handed her the keys without ceremony. He paid for the repairs the same way, the new windows, the fresh paint, the long tables and shelves and computers. When the contractors asked who was funding the work, they were told only that a private donor wished to remain anonymous. Avery had argued with him about that. "People should know it was you," she said. "They should see the great Grant Calloway did something good for once. It would change how this whole city looks at you." "That's exactly why it has to stay quiet," Grant answered. "If my name's on it, people will spend their time arguing about me instead of using the place. This isn't about changing my reputation. It's about the families." He paused. "Besides, I've spent my whole life being known for the wrong things. Let me do one right thing nobody knows about. That's worth more to me than a plaque." So the center opened under Avery's name and the names of the families who had built it alongside her. They called it the Beacon Center for Financial Safety. Inside, ordinary people could come for free, no questions asked, and learn the things that no one had ever taught them. How to read a statement that was too good to be true. How to check whether a company was real. How to spot the smooth, patient promises that men like Wyatt Mercer used to lower people's guard. Marcus came over from the community center to help run the programs. Diane, who knew better than anyone how the trap was built, taught classes on the warning signs from the inside. Marlene gave talks about asking hard questions and never being too afraid to ask them. And Logan, finally free of the weight he'd carried, ran the front desk. He greeted every person who walked in with the same gentle patience, often telling them his own story so they'd understand they weren't foolish and they weren't alone. The opening day drew a crowd. The families who had lost everything came in their best clothes, the same ones some of them had worn to the gala, but this time there was nothing nervous in how they stood. The older couple cut the ribbon together. The young mother brought her children, who ran laughing through the wide stone hall. People who had once felt ashamed and scattered now filled a room as a community, and the building that had once been a bank breathed with life again. Then came the part the city couldn't quite believe. A reporter, digging into who had funded the renovation, traced the quiet trail of payments back through the company to Grant Calloway. The story ran the next morning. The feared crime boss whose name people had whispered for years, the man who inspired fear across Chicago, had secretly paid to build a center that protected ordinary families from financial predators. The city didn't know what to make of it. Some refused to believe a man like Grant could do something purely good. Others remembered the gala, the way he had stood beside Avery while Mercer's empire fell, and began to wonder if they had only ever seen one side of him. The argument played out in newspapers and on the street. But through all of it, the Beacon Center kept its doors open, and people kept walking through them, and the families kept learning, which, in the end, was the only answer that mattered. Grant never gave an interview about it. When reporters tried, he said only one thing: "Ask Avery. It's her center. I just paid for the paint." On a quiet evening, a few weeks after the opening, Avery found Grant standing at the tall windows of his study, watching the lake the way he so often did. She no longer worked for him as a maid. She had tried to keep coming, out of habit and pride, but he gently refused, telling her she had more important work now. Still, she visited. The strange friendship that had grown between the crime boss and the woman who had cleaned his floors had become something neither of them could quite explain, but neither wanted to let go of. "It's strange," she said, standing beside him. "A year ago I was hiding bruises and crying on the phone in your back hallway. Sure, I'd lost everything. Now there's a building full of people learning how to keep what's theirs." "You didn't lose everything," Grant said. "You found out what you were made of. There's a difference." Avery looked out at the water, at the city lights beginning to glow along the shore. She thought about her mother, whose money had started all of this and who would never see the center. She thought about Logan smiling at the front desk, about Diane teaching a room full of strangers, about the older couple cutting a ribbon with steady hands. "He counted on us being too small," she said quietly, "too scattered, too ashamed to make any noise. He almost got away with it because that's how it always works." She turned to Grant. "But there's always one person who decides not to stay quiet, and then they're not alone anymore." Grant smiled, a real one, rare on his face. "And the whole city changes," he said. Outside, the lake stretched dark and calm beneath the lights, and somewhere across the water, the beacon center stood open, ready for whoever needed it next.